My husband emailed me from his office on a Tuesday afternoon while I was out in the back garden pulling the last of the carrots. The subject line just said, "We need to talk." The body said, "The buyout closed. 4.1 million. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I want you out of the house by the end of the month. Don't make this ugly." I read it twice, standing in the dirt with mud on my knees, and then I went inside and put the kettle on, because that is what you do when your whole life ends on a Tuesday. You make tea. Hello again, everyone. It's Helen here. Thank you for coming back to spend a little time with me. Before I get into it, do me a small kindness and tell me in the comments which town or city you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Last week, someone wrote in from a fishing village in Newfoundland, and I thought about that for days. And if the story moves you at all, a like helps more people find it. Now let me tell you what happened, because I still can hardly believe it myself. I am 71 years old. My name is Marlene Tessier, though I've gone by Marnie since I was a girl in the schoolyard back in Trois-Rivières. I taught grade 4 for 31 years, mostly in the same school in the East End of Ottawa, and I raised 2 children in a house on a quiet crescent in Nepean, the kind of street where everyone knows whose recycling bin is whose. My husband's name was Gerald Boudreau. We were married for 44 years. 44 years of his lunches packed, his shirts ironed, his mother nursed through her last winter in our spare room. And it all came down to an email with the subject line a teenager would use to break up over text. Let me back up, because the email didn't come out of nowhere. I see that now, though I didn't want to see it then. Gerald had spent most of his working life as a project manager at an engineering firm, a steady man with a steady paycheck, the sort who clipped coupons not because we needed to, but because waste offended him. About 4 years ago, near the end of his career, he and 2 younger colleagues left to start their own consulting outfit. I'll be honest, I thought it was a midlife thing, a way to feel important before retirement. I supported it anyway. I co-signed the line of credit at our credit union when the bank wouldn't touch them. I cashed in part of my own teacher's pension buyback to cover their first year of office rent on Bank Street. When the company had no money for a Christmas party, I baked 4 dozen Theresiers and drove them downtown myself. I want you to remember that part because Gerald conveniently forgot it. The business did better than any of us expected. Then, that spring, a big American firm came sniffing around wanting to buy them out. And somewhere in those months of meetings and lawyers and numbers with too many zeros, my husband became a stranger. It started small. He bought a leather jacket, Gerald, who'd worn the same beige windbreaker since Mulroney was in office. He started saying he had dinners downtown that ran late. He got a haircut that cost more than my entire winter wardrobe. There was a perfume on his collar one evening that was sharp and young and not mine. And when I mentioned it, he snapped at me for always looking for problems. That was new. Gerald never snapped. In 44 years, I could count our real fights on one hand. The woman's name was Chantal. I learned that later. She was their company's accountant, somewhere in her late 30s, and she had been at every one of those late dinners. I'm not going to pretend I didn't suspect something. I did. But there is a particular kind of cowardice that lives in a long marriage where you'd rather not know than have to do something about knowing. So I folded the laundry and pulled the carrots and told myself I was imagining it. Right up until that email. I'll tell you exactly what I did after the kettle boiled, because I'm not proud of all of it. I sat at the kitchen table and I cried for about 10 minutes, the ugly kind, the kind where you make sounds you don't recognize, and then I stopped. I wiped my face with a tea towel that had a mousse on it that my granddaughter gave me, and something in me went very, very still. 44 years. 2 children. A line of credit with my name on it. He thought he could send me an email and I'd just dissolve. I drove to my daughter's place in Barrhaven. Her name is José, and she's a nurse at the Civic. Tougher than I ever was. She took one look at me on her porch, still in my gardening clothes, mud on my knees, and pulled me inside without a word. I told her everything at her kitchen table while her husband took the kids upstairs. She didn't cry. She got that flat, dangerous calm she gets, the one I taught her apparently. "Mum," she said, "he is not going to win this. Tell me you're not going to roll over for him." I told her I had no intention of rolling over. I just had no idea yet what standing up was going to look like. That night I couldn't sleep in her guest room. I lay there listening to the furnace tick, and I did something useful instead of weeping. I made a list. What did I actually have? What had I lost? What could I still hold on to? I'm a teacher. Lists are how I think. By the time the sky went gray over the rooftops, I had 3 pages of notes in my reading glasses scrawl, and a single hard question circled twice at the bottom, whose name was on what? The house, I knew, was held jointly. That was good and bad. Good because he couldn't just toss me out. Bad because he'd want half. The credit union line of credit had my signature on it, which meant if the business had any debt, I was on the hook for it. Our savings were in joint accounts. My pension was mine. His business shares, and now the $4 million from the buyout. That was the great murky question. He clearly thought it was all his. He built it in his mind. But I had bankrolled the first year of it with my own retirement money, and I had the credit union paperwork to prove it. The next morning, Jose slid a coffee in front of me and a phone number on a sticky note. "She did my friend Renee's divorce," she said. "She's expensive, and she's mean, and she's exactly what you need." The lawyer's name was Pauline Lalonde, and her office was in a glass tower downtown that made my stomach flip just walking in. But Pauline herself put me at ease the moment she sat down across from me, a compact woman around 60, with silver hair cut sharp and reading glasses she looked over rather than through. I told her the whole thing, the email, the years, the tortillas even, which made her smile for the first time. She let me finish, and then she folded her hands and said, "Mrs. Tessier, your husband seems to be under the impression that this is a simple matter. Let me assure you, it is going to be a very complicated and very expensive one, for him." I asked her what she meant. She said, "In Ontario, when a marriage ends, we don't just split what's lying around. We do something called equalization. We calculate what each spouse's net worth grew by during the marriage, and the one who gained more pays the other half the difference. Your husband's company didn't exist before this marriage. It grew entirely inside it. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That $4 million is a marital gain. You are entitled to be equalized against half of it." I confess I didn't fully understand all the words, but I understood half. And I understood the look on Pauline's face, which was the look a cat gets when it has spotted something small and unwise. She told me to do 4 things immediately: open an account in my own name, move my half of the joint savings into it, exactly half, not a penny more, so no one could accuse me of grabbing. Stop paying anything toward the business line of credit and notify the credit union in writing that I disputed further liability. And, most importantly, gather every scrap of paper I could find. "Men like your husband," she said, "always think they're the smartest person in the room. They get sloppy. Find me his sloppiness." So I went home. The locks hadn't been changed. Gerald was apparently too busy with Chantal and his American lawyers to think of it, and I let myself in on a Wednesday morning when I knew he'd be downtown. The house smelled different already. There was a second toothbrush in the ensuite, a pale gray one, and a bottle of that sharp perfume on my dresser. My dresser. I stood there for a moment with my hand pressed flat against the wood, and then I got to work, and I did not cry, because Pauline needed paper, not tears. I took photographs of everything. Bank statements he'd left in the home office, still in their envelopes, half of them unopened. Gerald had always made me handle the mail, and he'd never learned how. Tax returns going back years. The buyout agreement itself, sitting in a folder marked "Do Not Took" in his blocky capitals, which nearly made me laugh out loud. And underneath it all, a credit card statement for a card I'd never seen, in his name only, with charges that made my stomach turn. A jeweler on Sussex Drive, a spa in the Glebe, a weekend at a lodge in Mont Tremblant, the same week he'd told me he was at a conference in Calgary. I photographed every page. I brought it all to Pauline in a grocery bag from Farm Boy, and she went through it page by page with growing satisfaction. When she got to the credit card, she actually set down her pen. "Mrs. Tessier," she said slowly, "do you see these dates? Some of these charges are after he opened the buyout negotiations. He's spending company-adjacent money on this woman during the very period we'll be valuing. That's reckless depletion of assets. A judge will not like it. And look here." She pointed at the buyout agreement. "He's deferred part of the payout into a holding account in his name alone, structured to look like it isn't liquid yet. He's trying to hide the size of the gain." "We'll see about that. I want to tell you something about that period, because it wasn't all strategy and paperwork. There were nights I sat in José's guest room and felt 71 years old in my bones. I'd think, what if it doesn't work? What if I end up in a one-bedroom apartment counting out my pension against the hydro bill while he and Chantal drink wine on a deck I'll never see? Fear is a tax collector. It came every night demanding payment. But every morning José would put coffee in front of me, and my son Etienne started calling from Calgary every evening just to say goodnight, and slowly I stopped paying that fear what it asked for. I'd been made small for so many years, quieter, more convenient, easier to overlook. I was done being easy to overlook. Gerald, meanwhile, got exactly as sloppy as Pauline predicted. When he received her formal request for financial disclosure, he laughed it off. José heard it from Etienne, who'd heard it from Gerald himself in one of his rare calls. "Your mother can't afford a real lawyer," he'd said. "She'll come around when she sees she has nothing." He told our son I was being emotional. He submitted a financial statement that was, in Pauline's words, a work of fiction. He valued his shares at a fraction of what the Americans had paid. He listed the house as solely his contribution. He didn't mention the holding account at all. And he claimed the credit union line of credit, the one I'd co-signed, the one with my pension money in it, was entirely a marital debt that should be split between us, while the business it had funded was entirely his asset. He wanted me to share the cost and none of the prize. That last part is what cooked him in the end. Because I had the original credit union documents, I had the withdrawal records from my own pension buyback. I had a paper trail showing that my money, my separate retirement money, had gone directly into launching the very company he was now claiming I had no part in. "He can't have it both ways," Pauline said, almost gleeful. "He cannot tell the court the debt is yours and the asset is his. We're going to make him choose, and either choice sinks him." There was a moment about 2 months in when I nearly took the easy road. Gerald, through his lawyer, offered a settlement, $250,000 and the equity in the house, to avoid the cost and stress of a trial. Pauline laid it on the table in front of me and said, "It's your decision. It always is. But I want you to know what we're leaving behind if you take it. 250,000 is a lot of money to a retired teacher. I'm not going to lie to you and say I didn't stare at that number for a long time. But then I thought about the email, the subject line. Don't make this ugly, as though I were the mess he had to step around, as though 44 years and the year of my pension were worth a fraction of what he'd skimmed off the top quietly. I slid the offer back across the table. "No," I said, "he doesn't get to decide what I'm worth. Not anymore." Pauline didn't smile. She just nodded once, the way you nod at someone who has finally understood the assignment. The matter went to a hearing in the late fall. I bought a new blazer for it, a deep teal, because I refused to walk into that courtroom looking like a woman who'd been thrown away. José and Etienne sat behind me. Etienne had flown in from Calgary and held my hand in the hallway and said, "Mum, whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Across the aisle sat Gerald, looking smaller than I remembered, in a suit too sharp for him. And in the gallery, in a coat that cost more than my car, sat Chantal, examining her nails as though she were waiting for a dentist. I won't recount every hour of it, because the law moves slowly and a courtroom is mostly a great deal of paper read aloud. But I will tell you the parts that mattered. Pauline established, document by document, that the company had been born and grown entirely within the marriage, making its value a marital gain subject to equalization. She produced my credit union signature and my pension withdrawal records and put it plainly to the judge. My client's separate retirement funds launched this enterprise, and now her husband wishes to claim the debt as shared and the company as his alone. Then she laid out the credit card statements, the jeweler, the spa, the lodge at Tremblant during a fictional Calgary conference, as evidence that Gerald had been depleting funds on his relationship during the very period in question. And finally, she presented the holding account he'd forgotten to disclose, the deferred buyout money sitting quietly under his name. The judge, a woman with a face like a closed door, looked up at that one and asked Gerald's lawyer a single question. "Counsel, why was this account not in your client's sworn financial statement?" There was no good answer, and everyone in that room knew it. The ruling came 2 weeks later. I sat in Pauline's office, and she read it to me, and I had to ask her to slow down twice because my ears were ringing. The judge found that the entire growth of the company over the marriage was a marital gain. She found Gerald's financial statement to be incomplete and his non-disclosure of the holding account to be deliberate. She found the credit union debt to be his sole responsibility, given that it had funded his enterprise and my separate money had gone into it. She ordered a full equalization payment to me reflecting half the marital gain, and she ordered Gerald to pay it within 90 days. She ordered him to cover my legal costs in full, noting his conduct during disclosure. And she granted me my half of the house, which Gerald, being unable to buy me out, would have to sell. When Pauline finished and set the pages down, the number at the bottom was more than I had earned in 31 years of teaching. I didn't whoop or cry. I just put my hand over my mouth and sat there. And Pauline poured me a glass of water and said very quietly, "You held the line, Marnie. You held the line. I'd be lying if I told you." The money was the sweetest part. It wasn't. The sweetest part was something Etienne told me a few months on. Chantal, it turned out, was less interested in Gerald once the $4 million had been cut roughly in half and the legal bills came due. She left him before the snow flew. He sold the house, our house, the one with the carrots in the back, and moved into a condo in Orléans. And he made a string of bad investments trying to feel rich again, and he lost a good chunk of what he had left. He'd burned bridges at his own company, too. The partners, embarrassed by the whole affair, eased him out. Our children are polite to him at Christmas and nothing more. Etienne told me Gerald asked about me once, asked how I was getting on. "What did you tell him?" I asked. Etienne said, "I told him you've never been better," which is true. Because it is true. I bought a little place of my own in Almonte, a town west of the city where the river runs over the falls right in the middle of everything, and I can hear the water from my kitchen. I planted carrots again, my own carrots, in my own ground. I went to Portugal in February with 2 women from my old school, and I drank wine in the afternoon and didn't apologize to anyone for it. I joined a quilting circle and a Tuesday night French conversation group, and I started painting watercolors, badly and happily. My grandchildren come up on weekends and we make tourtière together, and I taught my granddaughter the recipe that Gerald's company never thanked me for. I am 72 now. Divorced, by most measures alone, and I have not been this content in 30 years. People ask me sometimes whether I'm bitter. I'm not. That email didn't break my heart, though I thought it would, standing there with mud on my knees. What it did was hand me back a life I'd quietly given away one small surrender at a time. For 44 years I made myself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. I called that love. I know better now. So if you're listening to this and you're somewhere you've made yourself small, in a marriage or a job or a friendship that only takes. Hear me. You are not too old. You are not too tired. The paper trail of your worth is longer than you think, and it has your name on it, whether anyone else remembers or not. I thought my life ended on a Tuesday in the garden. It turned out that was just the day it finally began. Tell me where you're listening from, and remember, you are never too old to choose yourself. Standing in that garden with mud on my knees, I truly believe the email had ended me. What I understand now, 2 years on, is that nothing in that courtroom happened by accident. Every result grew out of a choice someone made, and Gerald made his long before I made mine. He chose to treat a year of my pension money as if it were nothing. He chose to spend on Chantal during the very months that would later be weighed and measured. He chose to hide that holding account and lie on a sworn statement. A person reaps the harvest of the seeds they plant, and Gerald planted carelessly, arrogantly, certain no one was keeping count. I was keeping count. I had always been keeping count. I think often about why it turned out the way it did, and it comes down to three things I didn't know I was carrying until I needed them. The first was simply refusing to do a wrong thing even when I had the chance. When I emptied half the joint savings, I took exactly half, not a dollar more, because Pauline asked me to and because I could not have lived with grabbing. That clean conscience is what let me sit in front of a judge with my chin up while Gerald squirmed over an account he buried. Doing right isn't only about being good. It's armor. It leaves your enemy nothing to throw at you. The second was learning, at 71, to think instead of merely feel. Crying at that kitchen table was honest, but it changed nothing. The list I made at 3 in the morning changed everything. Whose name was on what? Where the paper lived. Which of Gerald's boasts could be proven a lie? I had spent 44 years being told I was the emotional one, and I'd half believed it. It turned out I could read a bank statement better than my husband could hide one. Clear thinking, patient, and unhurried beats loud certainty every single time. The third was the plain stubbornness to hold the line when $250,000 sat on the table begging me to quit. Anyone can start a fight. Finishing one, through the slow grinding months when fear collects its nightly tax, takes a different muscle altogether. I built that muscle one morning coffee at a time, with Yosei beside me and Etienne on the phone, until quitting simply stopped being an option. So if there's anything I'd want you to carry away from an old teacher in Almonte, it's this. Keep your hands clean, because a clear conscience is the strongest position there is. Sharpen your mind, because the truth is usually written down somewhere if you're willing to go and find it. And steady your spine, because the people who win are rarely the loudest. They're the ones still standing when everyone else has sat down. Gerald had money and confidence and a younger woman on his arm. I had the receipts, a good lawyer, and the refusal to fold. I'd take what I had every time.